بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته, and welcome to Fiqh al-Muamalat online course, which will carry on our discussions on the asset in Murabahah. So we have discussed few points on the asset and we shall carry on some of the other points related to the asset of Murabahah. And the following point we'd like to discuss is that the transfer of ownership. We have mentioned that in the Murabahah, when the transaction is concluded, so basically the impact will be on the asset whereby the ownership will be transferred to the new purchaser. So here we are saying that the transfer of ownership is effected upon entering into valid sales and purchase contract. So when you have concluded, because Murabahah at the end of the day is a buying and selling, is a sales contract. When the contract is concluded, so typically the asset will be transferred to the buyer, even though there is no registrations of the ownership. This is a very important point here, is that from Sharia standpoint, the ownership will be impacted as a result of offer and acceptance. When there is a ijab and qabul, offer and acceptance, this ijab and qabul will have an impact, mark its effect on the subject matter, whereby the asset will be transferred typically to the purchaser, even though the registrations and the name of the asset still on the sellers. So you may have cases whereby a person buy a car and through offer and acceptance, and of course through other supporting documents, and he's driving the car, but still the car is in the name of the original sellers. But that one still basically maintain that the car, when it comes to the ownership, is with the new purchasers and not with the older owner, who is basically the sellers. Hence, the registrations is a legal process to complete the entire transactions and basically for also safeties and avoid any kind of dispute and problems in the future, especially after the person, in the case of the purchaser, dies and so on and so forth. I think it's very important to complete the entire cycles and do the registration respectively. But what we're trying to say here is that the non-completions of the registrations of the asset and the name of the new purchaser doesn't impact the validity of the transactions or the Murabahah, because sometimes the person may buy something with the intention to sell it in a very short time. So to avoid the process of the legal transfer, which may cost money, he may not do that. And maybe when he sells it to a third party, the ultimate purchaser may do that kind of legal process and shift the legal title of the name under his specific name. So what we're trying to say here, offer and acceptance will impact the ownership despite the registrations of the asset is not completed. Of course, we are saying here, provided that the sales and purchase is supported by evidence of transactions, meaning that there is evidence that there is transactions happen, like Murabahah happen with the documentation, offer and acceptance, maybe witnesses, other documentations that shows that there is transactions concluded and there is a buyer that has been happened, but of course registration is not completed. The other points that we would like to highlight and to add on the asset of Murabahah is that the transfer of Murabahah, or the transfer of the ownership, shall be effected by the seller disposing the right of ownership. This is, we call it a takhliya, meaning that one of the evidence and the sign that the asset has been sold and been disposed is what's called a takhliya wa tamkeen. So a takhliya is basically disposing the right of ownership, resulting in the purchasing having access to the asset. Meaning the person, as a result of that, will have access to the asset like a house. You will give the keys, you will give the access card, you give all the necessary document and keys to the new purchaser, so he will be able to access. So you will dispose it. It's a kind of takhliya and tamkeen, meaning you give to the purchasers a right to access to the car, like having the key, to the house, like giving access card, the keys, and all the necessary documents that enable him to go and access to the what's called the house, open it and use it respectively. And assuming it is a risk. So again, disposition of the asset, giving the right to the access, enable the new purchaser to have a full access to his new asset, as he has the right to basically use it or dispose it or give it as a gift on whatever he wants to do with it. At the same time, these kind of transactions and often acceptance and ownership will also assume the risk the risk through the mechanism, of course, permitted by Sharia, which means that the risk will be transferred respectively to the new purchaser. Before selling the asset of Murabahah, let's say in the case of banking, so when the bank financial institution purchased the asset from the seller, so the risk here is remain with the financial institutions. Now, once the transactions of Murabahah is performed and concluded, an ijab and a qabul, ownership will be transferred to the new purchaser, respectively. The new purchaser will assume the risk, meaning that all risk and liability associated with the asset will be transferred to the new purchaser. So, and the financial institution or the sellers will not be any more responsible, accountable, or liable when it comes to the risk of the asset. The following points is that the possession of the asset shall be either in the form of physical possessions, which is qabd haqiqi, or a constructive possession of qabd hukmi. This is a very important aspect when it comes to the Islamic banking today, and even in a business and finance today and trade. Ownership Sharia acknowledge the possessions of the asset, either through physical possessions, like for example you hold the asset with your hand, that's the physical possession. For example, you purchase a car, they will give you the key, you take the car and touch the car and drive it. A motorbike or a house, you get the key and basically you access to the key. This is, we call it qabd haqiqi, or it is a physical what's so-called possessions. But Sharia also recognize what's so-called constructive possessions or qabd al-hukmi. You don't have a physical what's so-called possession on it, but you have a constructive possession on it, and both are recognized by Sharia, and both enable you to have the right to resell back the asset to a third party, whether you have a physical possessions or a constructive possession. Constructive possession, the example we can give is that if you have the bill, the BL, the bill of lading, you know, in the import and export, sometimes the commodity is on the shipment. Let's say coming from China to Malaysia, or coming from Malaysia to Saudi Arabia. So, but you have the what's so-called the bill of lading. You have the BL, which represents basically the ownership of the cargo. So with this kind of constructive possessions, meaning that you are possessing the cargo, you are possessing the merchandise, you are possessing the commodity, and you have the right from Sharia standpoint to sell it, even though it is still on the way, because you have the ownership, constructive ownership of the commodity through these documents. Shares, for example, you have some stocks in the stock market, and you are not holding these shares physically, but constructively. So see, this one is regarded as a possession. You are able to sell it also. Your money in the account, if your money in the account, you are not holding your money physically, but it is in your account in the financial institution, in the bank. So you are possessing your money, but different between the money that you possess in your hand and in your wallet or at your home, and the money that you are possessing in your bank. So all this, we call it constructive possessions, which is allowed by Sharia, and it could be happen and reflected in the transactions of Murabahah or any other transactions where Sharia acknowledge and recognize the physical possessions and the constructive possession. With that, thank you very much, and see you inshallah in the coming session. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.